Welcome to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Former Congressman Peter Roskam leads Baker Hostetler's federal policy team. Through interviews with leading members of Congress and journalists, Peter provides an insightful, first-hand view into the latest legislative and political debates on Capitol Hill. In today's episode of the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam, Peter interviews Jake Sherman, a founder of Punchbowl News, an online news website that focuses on Congress. Sherman is also an NBC News contributor and co-author of a New York Times best-selling book on Congress and President Donald Trump's first term. Let's listen to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam.
Jake Sherman, it's great to be in conversation with you today. Let me give our listeners a little bit of just quick background. You're under 40 years old. By all accounts, you've had a spectacular career so far. Any parent, Jake, would be very, very proud of you. Among other things, you've written for the Wall Street Journal and Newsweek, but I think most interesting, when you and I met, you were a key person at Politico covering the Hill. Since then, you launched, and you're a co-founder of Punchbowl News. You're a co-author with Anna Palmer of The Hill to Die On, The Battle for Congress and the Future of Trump's America. And who knew, Jake, that Trump's America would be back? So
Not me.
thank you for taking the time to come on the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Really, really delighted to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And yes, when you and I first met, God, this was longer than either of us would care to admit.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably more than 15 years ago. And I was bugging you in the hallways as a young whippersnapper reporter, and now I'm an old whippersnapper reporter.
Jake,
So
you
you know,
were
I
very good.
I,
And
I
listen,
was.
a lot of people in your business, this is me talking now, are really subject, in my view, to audience capture. You know what I mean? It's tough to listen to. You have really resisted that. You are, I told you, you're the only one that my phone tells me, hey, Jake Sherman just posted something on X, number one. And you guys have, I think, a very good reputation of calling balls and strikes and being easy to listen to, easy to follow. So let's get right into it. Trump's big running of the table, I think, was a surprise for a lot of folks, myself included. Winning the battlegrounds and so forth. There was a foreshadowing of what was going to be happening in the Senate. I do think that Steve Daines, as the head of the campaign committee, overperformed. So it looks like they're going to land at 53 seats. And even, it's looking like Mike Johnson may just squeak out a majority here. But what do you make of this Capitol Hill that you're looking at, Jake? Just sort of overview. What do you think the next 2 years are going to look like?
Well, I'll tell you a few things. I'll give you a few thoughts on that. Number one, I think Johnson's going to have a very slim majority. I think bare bones majority, or a seat or two, or something like that. I mean, it's going to be very tight. I traveled with Johnson this summer, and he was telling people they'll have the cavalry was coming. Well, it didn't exactly come, but he should be commended for keeping the majority. I would imagine, although some would say, listen, Trump won, he should have a lot more seats. I don't buy that argument. I mean, Trump always outruns Republicans. That's just the reality of it. And your former staffer, Dan Constant, had a lot to do with that. Who ran CLF, the Congressional Leadership Fund, the House Republican Super PAC, which I think raised something like $300 million, a sum that when you were in Congress, you would have.
Oh,
If I told you that a super PAC for House Republicans was going to raise $300 million, you would have told me I was crazy. So
exactly.
now the Senate, listen, yes, Steve Daines he won Pennsylvania. It seems like, for now. We'll see how that turns out. The criticism, if there is a criticism of him, It will be that he didn't win Arizona and Nevada, which are two seats that he could have, that Trump won, two states that Trump won. And that I don't buy that criticism as much as some other people might, but that's something that people are saying. Now, what do I make of governing in this construct? Unlike 2017, two things. Paul Ryan was famous, who you served with and served closely with, was no fan of Donald Trump. I mean, we know that. We don't have to. That's not a. That's no secret. Mike Johnson is a fan of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell was no fan of Donald Trump. Is no fan of Donald Trump. Whoever is the Senate Republican leader will be somebody who will listen to Trump, and more importantly, the rank and file were all elected as Trump flavored Republicans for the most part. So you're looking at a construct in which Trump is going to have tremendous influence. And like, let's be clear. I mean, I always tell my staff and people in DC that like we're in the information conveyance business. We're not in the outrage business or anything like that. And um, Donald Trump has a mandate. I mean, he does.
Yeah.
Whether he has the votes to match that mandate, I think is something that we could argue, right? I don't know that he has the votes to match that mandate, especially in the House. But I do think. I mean, I was having this conversation with Laura Weiss, who covers taxes for us, and John Bresnahan and Melanie Zanona, our reporters, last night and yesterday. But there are very few Republicans, if any, who are not going to line up with him on almost anything he wants to do in the
Do you
House. I mean,
do you think, Jake, that there's anybody like a Thomas Massey or somebody, that basically says, "Hey, I'm going to use my leverage," or a Rand Paul, that sort of slice of Republican who will stand up for, some rules change, some something down the road, or do you think it is that Trump is just going to roll these guys?
I think he'll mostly roll them. I mean, listen, he has a cushion, right? I mean, budget reconciliation, through which they'll pass renew the tax cuts, needs 51. So if Rand Paul doesn't want to be involved, then that's something he's going to have to decide himself, and they could let him fly on that. I mean, listen, I don't think the criticism would be the deficit and debt, right?
Right.
I don't think Trump really cares about that. If
Right.
past is precedent and tells us about the future, what does Donald Trump care about the deficit? So that's kind of how I think of it. And listen, I do think that he is a that there. I was saying this to my colleagues last night. Like there will be. Folks uh, who are pains in the neck, but I think ultimately they they come around.
Yeah. So Donald Trump basically becomes the whip sitting in the Oval Office seeking
That's what he
votes.
was last time. That's what he was
Yeah.
last time. I mean, listen, whenever Kevin McCarthy had a problem, he called Trump. Not whenever, but a
Right.
lot of times he had a problem. He called Trump and he said, "You need to work this guy." And Trump, listen, Trump didn't know Congress. We'll see if he knows it any better this time, but he didn't know Congress. And let's just be clear. I mean, he has tremendous influence over these guys because in many cases, and in more cases than in 2016, Trump won their districts by 15 points. A lot of
Yeah.
Republicans, 20 points, whatever. So that's that.
And relationally, he's a lot further down the road, just in terms of knowing them, being on the campaign trail with them, and having a deeper understanding. Let me shift gears. Let's talk about the leadership races. It seems to me that three of them are pretty stable. That is, Schumer's not in any jeopardy. Hakeem Jeffries is not in any jeopardy. I don't think Johnson's in much jeopardy. It seems like a pretty stable leadership situation there. Do you agree with that so far?
I do. I do. I think, listen, I think Johnson might have some opposition on the House floor, but I don't think big opposition. I don't. I think mostly token opposition. And I think Trump will have to work people over on that. Jeffries will be fine. Steve Scalise, who will be majority leader, will be fine. And Tom Emmer, who has been the whip, a role that you're familiar with from your time as chief
Oh
deputy
yeah.
whip, will be fine. I mean, listen, as you know well, there's always complaints about people who count votes, but someone said something the other day, which I think is so true. Brendan Buck, who worked for Paul Ryan, said winning solves a lot of things.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and Trump won, and won resoundingly, and won very convincingly. And if Republicans keep the House majority, they're going to be excited about getting into power and doing, or retaining power and doing what they've always said they're going to do.
Let's shift then to the Senate Republican leadership race. That's a big one. Do you think it's between, Senator Thune and Senator Cornyn? It seems to me, now you're the guy who's paid to know, Jake, but it seems to me that it's advantage Thune right now. Number one, do you think that's right? And then number two, do you think that Trump weighs in?
I don't think I well, listen, let me preface it. Well, let me say a couple things. Number one, Rick Scott is also running, Republican of Florida. I don't think there's a real that's I think of the three, he's probably the weakest right now. He's angling for the Trump endorsement. I don't think Trump will weigh in, but what do I know? I don't know that Trump knows whether he'll weigh in or not. Right? I just simply don't know. I think Thune is probably the favorite, but not by much, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, Thune and Cornyn are both well liked. They're both good inside operators. Um, Thune is obviously the number two right now. Cornyn was the number two before him. But I do think that Thune has the edge. But you know how these things go. This is a secret ballot among senators who consider themselves the greatest thing in the world,
Yes.
and they don't take kindly to um, suggestions, let's call it, about what they do, what they should and shouldn't do. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Well, and as you know, in leadership races, the only people you can count on are the ones that tell you to your face that they're going to vote against you. That's
And
the only.
yes, yeah, if they tell you that they're for you, you can't really take that even to the bank.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's shift to lame duck. So, a lot of pressure. December 20th, as you've been reporting, is the day when the continuing resolution expires. What do you think? Do you think Mike Johnson is working closely with Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago, looking for a signal about what they should do? Do they clear the decks for a new Trump administration? Do they kick it into next year? What do you think?
So it's very funny you asked that. I recently, I've been talking obviously to a lot of people on the Trump transition team, and without getting into too many details to betray confidence, they don't have any idea what he wants right now. Now, if I were Trump, and what I say is that we at Punchbowl News have a lot of opinions, but they're all about strategy. They're not about
Yeah,
policy. We
yeah,
don't take a view on policy. We're not like some of our other brethren in the media. But if I'm Donald Trump, what I do is I say, get government funding, get me until September 30th. Just get me there. Don't
right.
I don't want a fight in the first 2 months of my majority. I just don't have my power. I don't want that. And I would even clear the debt limit. you
Right,
know, I'd put the debt limit on the floor and have Trump come out and say, "Listen, you got to do the debt limit. I need some space. I need 2 years of the debt limit, and we're going to create the greatest economy in the world." This is what Trump would say. This is not what I'm saying.
right.
I would create the greatest economy in the world that we won't have to worry about it anymore. And that's nonsense, obviously, but that's what I would do if I were him. I don't think they have a well-formed view at this point, but he should really. I mean, Johnson has made all sorts of promises that are, in my estimation, silly. Like, I'm not going to do an omnibus. I'm not going to. Well, listen, you're about to get into a trifecta where most likely where you have the majority of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Clear the decks, and you have, and I think this is underappreciated. They have 100 days. They have 100 days. That's his whole presidency legislatively, not the whole presidency, but it's he's got 100 days when the ground is really fertile to get stuff done. Don't worry about government funding. Don't do that to yourself. Just get this stuff, clear the deck, and move on.
It's so interesting. You're prompting me to advice that former Congressman, former Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri gave me when I first came in. And he said, "Never say what you'll never do because you never know."
That's
And
exactly right.
there's a lot of wisdom to that because you just don't know how these things are going to be playing out
You know,
now.
I just said something like that to one of my colleagues, one of my reporter colleagues who works with us at Punchbowl News. We were talking about there's a conversation right now that we're actually going to report today. We're going to report it in our midday edition. Probably it'll be out by the time this airs, but that the House Ways and Means Committee is considering legislation to alter the PNTR, the trade relations with China, and we were talking about whether that could get through the Ways and Means Committee. And the conversation was, well, the Ways and Means Committee probably can't pass this. And I just said, you don't know. We don't, I mean, probably not, but like, who the hell knows, especially with Trump in the Oval Office. You know, you just don't know what can happen. You never, it's a twist on never say what you won't do, because you never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's interesting, this whole, and you've seen this, the GOP shift internally over the years from, the easiest characterization of it was, a Wall Street Journal oriented editorial page, um, Republican worldview from an economic point of view, and that is shifting with this growing populism. And I mean, the tariff kind of talk that Donald Trump is contemplating was completely unorthodox. And this mercantilism that he's bringing to the economic debate is a big, big shift. And it's coming in the midst of a huge tax debate. And so Ways and Means members and Senate Finance Committee members are going to be, are really going to be having to deal with it. One other point, Jake, on Johnson's decision on the continuing resolution, he's got to have Trump's cover if he clears the decks. You know what I mean? Because that notion of them, him freelancing on this and saying we're just going to do it, and then him being on the floor, Johnson being on the floor for a speaker's vote, creates a lot of vulnerability, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, listen, someone said to me the other day, well, maybe Trump could just bash anything he does. And I said, no, he needs to have Trump's buy-in and Trump's help in getting this across the finish line. For sure. Absolutely for sure. So I completely agree with you on that.
How about House Republicans who have aspirations to be in the in the administration? There's any number of these folks. It strikes me that they're landlocked, basically, because you can't let somebody out of the House if you've got a 1 or 2 seat majority, because you're so vulnerable, and it takes so long through a special election to fill that gap. Do you think folks are landlocked now?
I do. I agree with you 100%. Listen, I think there's one person that really wants something and is in the mix for something, and that's Elise Stefanik, who is the House Republican Conference Chair. She wants to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in New York. And that is a Republican seat. You'll remember it didn't start out as a Republican seat when she first was elected. It was a swing
Right.
seat. Actually, I went up there with Kevin McCarthy back in, I think it was 2014 when she was first elected. It was a very difficult seat. Now it's a Republican seat. But how do you, if you have 219 House Republicans, how do you how do you do that, right? How do you take someone out of the game and put your majority back to basically reset your majority? I think it's very difficult, and I think it's going to be a very difficult challenge for the Trump administration, and it could be a huge disappointment for many House Republicans who really want in to the Trump administration. I think they'll take a bunch of senators, or there are a bunch of senators who want it. Bill Haggerty of Tennessee, um, uh, any number of senators want it. Marco Rubio is in the mix. Eric Schmidt. There's just a lot of people who are eager to get into this administration, and really, the Trump team cannot take anybody that doesn't have a Republican governor in a Republican state. To be honest with you, so. All of those things mixed together, it's a complicated matrix for the Trump team.
It does seem like Elise Stefanik is in a unique situation, because, she was so effective in terms of calling out anti Semitism on college campuses, forcing the resignation basically through the work that she did on, for 2 Ivy League presidents and so forth. And she's close to Trump. So if anybody is going to be able to pull that off, I think that it would be Elise Stefanik. But
Yeah, I just think, but a vote is a vote, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's not that easy. And no matter how great the person is, taking them off the battlefield and lowering your majority by one is quite difficult. And I mean, listen, the thing with Stefanik in New York is the county chairs, who are all Trumpers, would select the nominee, and that nominee would win. But you should have no doubt that Democrats would pour a bunch of money into it, and it would be tougher than people think now. Kathy Hochul is no fan of Elise Stefanik, and she sets the election date. So listen, that's that. And by the way, this as a side note, I mean, I was shocked to see, and I'm sure you were too, that Donald Trump only lost your home state of Illinois by just a much narrower margin than any Republican in many years, right?
many year, Jake, I was really, really surprised. And you look at the statewide numbers, and it's like, wow, you know what I mean? And it begs the question, what would it have been like if he had competed here?
Because what did Obama win Illinois with? I mean,
Oh,
he must,
hey, that was my that was my first reelect, and he was,
right?
Obama got something like, I think I got 59% that first reelect, and Obama got 58%. But this was like DuPage County, which was a GOP enclave back in the day, kind of the old Orange County
Yep.
model. But
Hmm.
that's all shifted just incredibly over the years, kind of hardly
Yeah.
recognizable. And then Trump comes
Yep.
in and just kind of runs, as strong as anybody is probably run in 30 years in Illinois, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I'm looking right now, 54-45. Kamala Harris won, which is just, I mean, in my home state of Connecticut, which is usually a 20-point Democratic victory, was this time 14 points, for Harris on top of Trump, a state, by the way, that has not elected a Republican to the House since 2006. You'll probably remember
yeah,
who that was. Chris Shays
yeah,
was the
I
last
served with them.
last Republican elected from Connecticut to any federal office, House or Senate. So it's a different universe right now.
Oh, it is. So hey, so the Donald Trump has just announced Susie Wiles as his chief of staff, and there's a lot of folks in sort of GOP circles or business circles that look at that and they say, okay, that's a good move, that's a restraining influence, et cetera. And yet we've got somebody on our team at Baker Hostetler who is the political director for the 2016 Trump campaign, who said, don't kid yourself. You know what I mean? It's like Donald Trump is his own chief of staff, and folks around him are managing, different elements of this, but don't think that this is going to be some cookie cutter approach that just because he approaches or he appoints someone with Susie Wiles' background and strong reputation in terms of management and et cetera, means that Donald Trump is going to be, quote, managed. What's your view on what this White House is going to look like and the administration will look like and the types of people who are going to be attracted to work in it?
I think it's going to be people who Donald Trump has personal relationships with and likes. I think he's going to be somebody who is, Trump is who he is, and there's no chance of controlling him, and there's no real upside of trying to control him. He's going to do what he wants to do. I think that in the last administration, which was Trump's first foray into elected politics, obviously, um, Trump put a lot of people around him who he didn't really know that well as chief of staff and in senior roles. People like, John Kelly, or all sorts of people. Now, I don't think that. Listen, I think he's going to put people in that make him comfortable and who are willing to execute his agenda. That's kind of the long and short of it. I think that if you try to control him, you're gonna fail. Period.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, that's our colleague's observation too. Okay, last couple lightning round
Sure.
questions. Just take us around the world. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu this week, What are you thinking about relationally with Donald Trump, and how significant is that for Israel?
It's very interesting that you asked that. I was in Israel this summer and I did a bunch of meetings. I interviewed Netanyahu. I did a bunch of meetings with people in his cabinet and his administration. And they obviously they are very pro-Trump. I mean, there's no secret about that. They think he was great to them. They let him they let Netanyahu do what he wanted to do, et cetera, et cetera. I just said to them multiple times to various people in Israel that Trump is very sensitive to headlines, and I think he'll let Israel do what they want to do. But he has said publicly, "Do not let this go on for too long. We need to get this done and move back to a peace stance." And I think, listen, I think you're happy, but I think there is some cause for at least caution, right? I really do think that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, just I had the chance to meet Netanyahu basically one on one, and it was right when Obama was doing the Iran deal. It was that summer, and it kind of a
Yep.
prelude to it. And I told my wife, I said, "This guy's got the weight of the world on his shoulders," meaning Netanyahu, and you've just got to feel like this dynamic with Trump has to be so much easier. Okay, how about Zelensky in Ukraine?
As we're recording this, there's been reporting that Trump and believe it or not, Elon Musk just spoke to Zelensky, and Zelensky was reassured by what he heard from Trump, whatever that means. I don't know what that means. Um, I think that, listen, you have to be nervous, but there's some reporting in the Wall Street Journal over the last couple of days that indicate that. Uh, Trump wants a deal that would freeze the lines of the war and cement them effectively. So let Russia keep their gains, which is a scary thing for Ukraine, and the U.S. would keep pumping Ukraine with a bunch of money and weapons. I think I don't know how that I don't know how that would work, but I would be nervous if I were Zelensky because Trump has made clear that he doesn't want to really be involved in this, and he wants to have peace and he wants a deal, and who the hell knows what that deal looks like if you're Donald Trump. So I would be very
Oh,
nervous.
two others, Putin
Yep,
and Xi Jinping.
I'll do them together. I mean, listen, Trump is um let's put it this way. Trump is unpredictable. And no one knows what he's going to do at any point. I think that, listen, he is much more I don't know about favorable, but somewhat favorable to them than Biden was, who lectured them and about the shortcomings in their country. But all of that said, I think China's going to take a big hit with Donald Trump in the White House, and Russia. But if Russia's able to keep its land that it gained in Ukraine, that's something that Putin will probably be happy about.
Well, Jake Sherman, you've given us an incredible insight today. Look at your watch. We had you in and out of here in 30 minutes, so you can go to the
That's
rest of your kids' events today. And I'm really grateful, Jake, for your time. And for those who are not familiar, Punchbowl News is a great source of information. And like I said at the top of the show, you guys really you're probably better sourced than anybody else on Capitol Hill, and you call balls and strikes. And those are attributes that are really admirable in an era where people have a lot of skepticism about they read. My experience is that you guys are really at the top of your game.
I
So
appreciate that.
if you're for those who are interested, keep track of us on the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. It's easy to subscribe. And again, Jake, thanks for your time. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Peter and Jake. If you have any questions for Peter, his full contact information is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to Baker Hosts in the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Comments heard on Baker Hosts are for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice regarding any specific facts or circumstances. Listeners should not act upon the information provided on Baker Hosts without first consulting with a lawyer directly. The opinions expressed on Baker Hosts are those of participants appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the firm. For more information about our practices and experience, please visit bakerlaw.com.